We start with a manic drug smuggler lobbing bags of cocaine out of a plane, before getting so excited that he totally knocks himself unconscious and tumbles out like a right, Wally. Anyway, then we cut to Chattahoochee National Forest in 1985, as two loved-up foreign tourists called Olaf and Elsa come across a giant fuck-off bear, who's acting more mental than Britney Spears in 2007, or Britney Spears in current day. Suddenly, though, it totally spots the pair, and having got a bad case of the munchies, it totally gobbles up that Elsa chick and leaving nothing behind but her leg.
Damn!
We then cut to a news report, informing us that that dopey twat what knocked himself out just trying to exit a plane totally died when his chute failed to open, and the stunningly diverse local coppers called Bob and Reba tell us that there's now a fuck ton of cocaine lying about in the woods. And said fuck ton of cocaine what's just out lying about in the woods totally belongs to a local drug kingpin called Sid White, who tells his fixer David to take his fat ass over to his son's place and then get their butts over to Chattahoochee to get his product back already, or else they'll all be in the bad books of the nutjob Colombians and shit. Next we meet a nurse called Sari and her daughter Dee, who seems to be so poor that they can't even afford basic paper supplies, so her little daughter has to draw on her shoe to pass the time.
Okay.
So David goes to collect his boss's son, who's out here crying like a little bitch because his wife's just died and he's also abandoned his infant child because reasons. And now he even has a misspelt tattoo of her name on his chest. And I can totally relate, because I once got a tattoo of my girlfriend's name on my chest, and she weren't best pleased when I came home with the word Mason instead of Madison on my left tit, and promptly accused me of cheating on her with a homosexual. Anyway, Dee skips school with her little blonde mate called Henry, as Bob the diverse copper gives his diverse partner Reba his new pooch to look after, because he's totally got to go and do some proper police work in a small forest rather than sitting around here all day filling out paperwork and grooming a random dog. Sari then comes home from her shift to find her daughter has bunked off school, whilst elsewhere we then meet the local park ranger, who's a rather horny lass and totally got a crush on the visiting wildlife expert called Peter. And he's dug out her cardboard mascot what the park hasn't used for years, before totally complimenting her on her dusty beaver. Anyway, the naughty kiddies what thinks it's okay to just skive off school and ruin their academic prospects soon come across a brick of cocaine. Man, why were my days bunking off school never this exciting? But suddenly, that coked up bear from earlier appears and sneezes in their faces, because apparently he's learned nothing from the recent pandemic about wearing a mask or at least producing a sternutation in your friggin' elbow. Elsewhere, Sari tells the ranger that she's totally lost her little daughter what loves to draw all over perfectly good footwear, and so they all go out looking for her, and soon pass a group of park punks on the way who have totally been terrorising the area by recklessly riding their bikes without any helmets or shin pads and shit. Anyway, said park punks try to rob the drug boss's lead henchman and hilariously get themselves smacked up inside a little bathroom. Later, his mate Eddie comes in and finds 3 exhausted men in a box stall. And before you can say, seems like we've got a George Michael copycat on our hands, they wake up the blonde one what looks and acts like a young Sam Rockwell, and say that if he don't tell him where the rest of the coke is, then he'll say hurty words about his favourite actor's performances in Moon and the Green Mile, and also carve him up like a common hog. Elsewhere, Sari and the rangers find little Henry up a tree and ranting and raving about a messed up hairy growler. It's steady. But they just can't believe a giant fuck-off bear would attack an innocent little blonde boy like that, until suddenly, said hairy growler starts trying to munch him up, and even cheekily bites that park ranger on her arse cheek. So she sods off back to the hut, whilst the visiting wildlife activist falls face first into a shredded stash of snuff, and then clambers up an opposite tree like a right cuck. The mostly peaceful killer bear then tries to go after the boy, but gets distracted in the nick of time by Peter and his powdered nose, so naturally, it races up over to the other tree and tucks into his crotch, and thereby giving Sari and her daughter's friend time to escape, as the bear swiftly yeets poor Peter and then snorts a line off his dismembered leg. Because comedy, bro. Anyway, the traumatised Henry, who's now undoubtedly scarred for life, tells his mate's mum that the bear totally didn't kill her artistic kid what hates playing trainers and instead took her to its lair over in the mountains. Whilst back at the cabin, the horny park ranger, what just got her arse eaten but not in a good way, teams up with the other two amateur gang members before they find a neighbour at the door and asking if they have any sugar. A giant spaced out grizzly bear bearing his titties and shit. So the horny park ranger accidentally blows the noggin off of one of those park punks, and thereby covers the poor creature in grotty goon gristle. And after stalking them from outside the hut, the last dopey thug gets totally facepalmed, but rather literally. Later, Officer Bob finally arrives at the park, while Sari and Henry make their way to the mountains, where she tells them that he better not have touched any of that white stuff or else he'll develop a habit. And end up on the board of a Ukrainian energy company before getting foot jobs off hookers and snorting Parmesan cheese and stuff. Then an ambulance crew turns up to totally help the horny park ranger with a battered body. But they also get assaulted by that coked up carnivore before it chases them down the road and totally boards their motor. Because this dopey twat was too busy screaming in fear to do the obvious thing and close the bloody doors already. And the careless bear soon chucks the horny park ranger out of the moving vehicle, where she promptly becomes a bona fide meat crayon. Rather like those nasty clips from that subreddit what I like to watch at 3 in the morning. Before the Asian paramedic decides that she totally hates nature, so promptly drives into a fucking tree.
Not a great plan.
Anyway, that phony fakey young Sam Rockwell cosplayer gives Eddie a hug and helps him get over the recent death of his wife and the fact that he has the word John tattooed on his chest when her name was actually Joan. And he finally takes him over to the gazebo where he and his mate supposedly stashed the bag of drugs. But shockingly, he's totally gone missing before Officer Bob appears on the roof and sticks a gat in his face. And he then shoots David's fingers off when he tries to go for his shooter. So naturally, Eddie picks up the 7 digits and puts them in his back pocket for safekeeping. Officer Bob then boasts how they're all going to jail when he finally finds a way to get down safely off the top of a small gazebo, until they all come under attack by that relentless Pablo Escobar, who's jonesing for a fix. But is also so exhausted by this point in the film that he flat out collapses on top of poor Eddie. And it looks like it's curtains for the whiny widow what has a shit yet hilarious tattoo of a random man's name on his chest. But luckily, turns out he's not been squashed flatter than Prince Elrond's face, and is totally still alive because reasons. And moreover, the bear is apparently a girl bear, and he knows that because her furry flaps are totally tickling his ear. And before he can say, how can her genitals be on his ear when it laid the same way on top of him, and also did you just assume it's pronouns, we cut back to Sari and Henry, who come across the vengeful Olaf from the start of the film and who's now cowering in a small field. Meanwhile, Officer Bob and the baddies declare a temporary trucy team up now both sides realise that the enemy of my enemy is my friend and certainly not a giant fuck off bear and shit. But said giant fuck off bear totally wakes up and gorges on some more narcotics. And before you can say, why ain't this bear dead 10 times over already when my mate Dave once overdosed on 5 spoons of cowboy, Officer Bob throws over some more drugs to distract her after she tries to flat out molest a grieving widow. And although Budget Sam Rockwell runs off to get the heck out of Dodge, David don't really want to leave empty-handed and risk getting deaded by the Colombian mob by leaving $14 million worth of their product on top of a small gazebo with the local filth. And after a tense standoff, poor Officer Bob gets shot up by his arch-nemesis Sid White, who just can't believe his shipment of drugs got lost in the post and now he can't even get a refund because a giant fuck-off bear munched up his merchandise and shit. So they go back and threaten to kill Officer Bob if he don't hand over the snuff. But luckily, his stunningly diverse partner cop arrives just in the nick of time to totally save the day. But in a shocking twist, what no one could ever see coming, an American cop turns out to be crooked.
No way!
So they head off towards the bear's lair, as poor Officer Bob succumbs to his wounds, and now rather regrets giving his pet pooch to a Ben copper to look after.
No!
Elsewhere, Sari enters said bear's lair and totally reunites with her artistic daughter Dee Dee, what loves desecrating box fresh crepes. And before you can say, why does the bear kill everyone it meets during its drug-fueled rampage except for the one preteen it just decides to kidnap, they come across a pair of bear cubs getting caked in the white stuff. Man, last time I got caked in the white stuff, I simply finished out the hour and never went back to that baking class for beginners. Anyway, the trio then retreat further into the cave because reasons, as Sid and the baddies also arrive at the hairy bear's lair and bizarrely find the body of poor Olaf via a jarringly edited flashback. A man who was so important to the plot that he totally died off screen without even having a proper death scene and she.
LOL!
Naturally, Eddie and David just want to go home already, because said Eddie fella actually has a son to get back to, and David can't feel his fingers. And quite literally, because they're in his mate's back pocket and she. But Sid says he's going further into that dark and deadly cave, what's full of disfigured bodies and dangerous doped up predators, to totally get his drugs back, and so are all of you lot. So shut up about it already. A little later, and all the remaining characters totally converge in the central cavern, as Sid fights off the pair of drug-addicted Cokie cubs. So naturally, the giant stressed out mama bear turns up all super pissed, because she fucking hates strange men invading her home and criticising her parenting skills. And she just can't believe they'd encourage her littlins to be degenerates and take drugs that will harm their minds and bodies despite not being old enough to consent to any of it. I mean, who do they think they are? Public school teachers? Anyway, so she soon confronts the main baddie whilst the others all jump into the waterfall. But Sid promptly fills it with lead, and it looks like it's curtains for the strung-out single mother who's clearly watched too much Scarface. And Tilly knocks a brick of the white stuff down on top of her, which totally resurrects the man-eating killing machine and supercharges her bloodlust.
No!
And she ends up disemboweling the naughty drug lord, even though he was technically a supplier.
No!
The next morning, they all go their separate ways, whilst the stunning and brave yet dirty copper totally redeems herself by giving her dead partner's dog to the very son and accomplice of his own friggin' murderer. And although the Colombian cartel will soon be after them for failing to retrieve the multi-million dollars worth of coke and leaving it in the lair of a bear family to presumably continue getting high on and murderously rampaging through the forest in a set-up for a sequel, Eddie plans to grab his son and get the heck out of town, before he has another breakdown after losing both the love of his life and his own father in the span of a week. And we end with Sari and the two Sprogs heading home, whilst passing the splattered corpse of that horny park ranger, who's still lying in the road like yesterday's turd. And that's it. That's the movie. Though my favourite part was when the film ended with a tasteful and sensitive message in loving memory of Ray Liotta. Barely 2 minutes after he had his intestines ripped out and was gloriously gutted like a common hog.
Nice.
Though, after seeing the post-credit scene where Pound Shop Sam Rockwell runs off with a bag of coke and sticks it in the middle of a flock of sheep, I can't wait for the inevitable Marvel-style cinematic universe of drugged-up creature features. Like heroin armadillo or ketamine kangaroo.
LOL!
But anyway, that's the plot and that's your lot. Considering that bell thing so you don't miss any future recaps. Tell me if you like this flick in the comments if you have time, and I'll get high with you in the next one.